Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Let's see the headlines. Iran says it's fully prepared to meet the impact of new US sanctions after Washington announces economic D-Day against the country. Ukraine's allies pledge to step up air defences after meeting for Independence Day celebrations in Kyiv. And Russia says Armenia is free to leave the CSTO, as Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says an application to join the EU will begin in the near future. Iran says it's fully prepared to meet the impact of the new US sanctions after Washington announced what it calls an economic D-Day to isolate the country. Iran's economy minister says the new sanctions regime will lead to another defeat for the US.
The US Treasury Department has broadened the range of Iran-related activities that could trigger secondary sanctions, including business linked to shipping, technology, and digital assets. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that countries continuing to trade with Tehran could eventually face restrictions on access to the US dollar-based financial system. Washington has described the campaign as an economic D-Day, aimed at further isolating Iran. The latest measures targeted nearly 60 Iran-linked entities accused of supporting Tehran's nuclear and missile programs, cyber activities, and oil shipments. Companies in China, the UAE, Singapore, and other countries, including a cooking oil refinery in France, were among those affected. The United States has maintained sanctions on Iran for decades, targeting areas including oil revenues, access to military-related components, and businesses linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Tehran has rejected the new pressure campaign. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said Washington must change its approach, warning that coercion and pressure would only complicate efforts to resolve disputes. Iran's economy chief Ali Madanizadeh called the looming measures another failure. He said that Tehran had anticipated them and has a two-year plan. Iran has also signaled proposals to strengthen economic ties with partners such as China. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi described Beijing as Iran's first economic partner, saying closer cooperation through frameworks such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS could help expand economic resilience. At the same time, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Washington was not ruling out military action against Iran, including in the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran has warned of retaliation. A spokesperson for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said US interests and key energy routes could be targeted if Iranian infrastructure came under attack. Despite a recent lull in major military strikes, there is still little sign of a diplomatic breakthrough as tensions remain high over the Strait of Hormuz and regional security.
Iranian consumers say rising prices and declining purchasing power are already making everyday life increasingly difficult. Residents in Tehran say years of isolation have left household incomes under extreme pressure.
Iranians say rising prices and falling purchasing power are making daily life increasingly difficult as the United States threatens what it calls unprecedented economic pressure on Tehran. In Tehran's markets, residents say the impact of years of sanctions is visible in the rising cost of food and essential goods, with many households struggling to keep up with expenses.
Dairy products have become very expensive. Every time I go to that store, when I walk in there is one price, and when I walk out there is another. That is why per capita consumption of dairy products is declining, and the same goes for meat and protein. People like me, who are retired, get a salary increase only once a year, but prices go up every moment. The comments come after US President Donald Trump announced plans for what he described as an economic D-Day against Iran, promising a major campaign of sanctions and economic isolation.
These sanctions are 100% making life difficult. With the incomes we have, we simply cannot make ends meet. My child is now unhappy with me and asks, what kind of a job is driving a taxi that you cannot earn a sufficient income?
Economists warn that further economic pressure could deepen challenges for Iranian households and businesses, which are already facing high costs and reduced purchasing power.
Meanwhile, oil prices have steadied in early trading on Tuesday despite the news of sanctions on Iran. On Monday, oil prices fell more than $2 a barrel. Brent crude slipped 0.1% to just over $92 a barrel, while US crude edged 0.1% higher to just over $85. Investors are weighing the risk of further supply disruption against hopes that tougher economic pressure could help ease the conflict. Pakistan's army chief has visited Tehran for talks on bilateral ties and regional developments, while Oman's foreign minister is due in the Iranian capital on Tuesday. Both countries have played a key role in mediating between Iran and the US in the ongoing conflict. Turar Shirililiu has the latest from Tehran.
Pakistan's top military commander and a key figure in mediated talks between Iran and the US, Field Marshal Qasim Munir, paid a one-day visit to Tehran on Monday, meeting senior Iranian officials as talks between Tehran and Washington remain stalled. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai said Field Marshal Munir's visit is aimed at strengthening bilateral relations and discussing regional developments. He told the weekly press briefing that navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is also on the agenda because of Pakistan's interest in the strategic waterway and its position on the Sea of Oman. The Pakistani army, in an official statement issued in Islamabad, said the visit was aimed at helping to resolve conflicts in West Asia peacefully and sustainably. General Munir, whose country mediated the fragile ceasefire agreement between Iran and the US in June, is accompanied by Pakistan's Interior Minister Syed Mohsen Naqvi. He reportedly spoke by phone to US President Donald Trump before departing for Tehran. As Iran and the US brace for a prolonged standoff over the Strait of Hormuz and other major disputes, talks between the two sides have reached a fresh impasse, raising concerns among countries in the region. Meanwhile, it was announced that Oman's foreign minister, Badr al-Busaidi, is scheduled to visit Tehran on Tuesday. Oman has long acted as a mediator between Iran and the US officials, passing messages between Tehran and Washington. It has also been in talks with Iran over the management of maritime traffic through the strait, with both countries bordering the strategic waterway linking the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Tehran says it has reached an agreement with Muscat on shipping corridors through the narrow strait, but accuses the US of pressuring Oman not to accept Iran's terms, including the introduction of navigation fees and a ban on foreign military vessels passing through the waterway. According to Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai, there is no connection between the visits by General Munir and Omani Foreign Minister al-Busaidi. He says the talks between Iran and Oman will focus on bilateral ties and the Strait of Hormuz. Turar Shirililiu from Tehran for A News.
The United Nations says disruptions to maritime trade routes are putting further pressure on energy supplies and food security. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for the protection of major shipping lanes and proposed a mechanism to help ensure the movement of essential goods.
Today, conflicts in different regions are converging in their impact on the world's most vulnerable people. In the Middle East, ongoing attacks and the disruption of maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea around Bab el-Mandab are constraining the movement of energy, fertilizers, and other essential commodities. In the conflict following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, attacks are threatening shipping routes vital for the export of oil, grain, and other agricultural products. These crises are choking arteries of global trade and squeezing the global food system especially hard. The result is clear: higher prices, deepening hunger, weaker harvests, and greater suffering, especially for the world's most vulnerable people.
The cost of shipping Pakistani exports to the United States has risen sharply, with higher insurance and fuel costs adding to the impact of the regional war on global trade. Mariam Zia reports from Islamabad.
The impact of the US-Iran war is now being felt in the cost of moving Pakistani goods to the United States. Pakistan Ships Agents Association, PSAA, says freight rates to the US East Coast have risen by more than 200% since January. A 40-foot container from Karachi to the American East Coast now costs $7,900 compared with $2,500 in January. For the US West Coast, the rate has risen from $2,000 to $6,400. The PSAA says the higher war risk insurance premiums and bunker fuel costs are key factors behind the increase. The wider disruption to shipping around the Strait of Hormuz is therefore reaching trade routes far beyond the Persian Gulf. For Pakistan, the pressure is significant because the United States is a major market for Pakistani exports, particularly textiles. The All Pakistan Textile Mills Association says some current shipments from Karachi to the major US ports are costing as much as $12,000 to $13,000, substantially above the PSAA's reported rates. For exporters who agreed prices months ago, the additional freight costs can mean a direct hit to their profit margins. The wider concern is that a conflict centered on a vital Middle Eastern shipping route is now raising the cost of Pakistani goods, entering one of its most important overseas markets, making them less competitive. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
The United States has officially removed Syria from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. The diplomatic shift ends decades of sanctions, clearing the way for Damascus to attract foreign investment to rebuild after 14 years of civil war.
After decades on a US terrorism blacklist, Syria is officially open for international business. The historic delisting took effect on Monday following a congressional review in Washington. In a national video address, Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa hailed the decision as a turning point that ends years of economic and diplomatic isolation.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. Today, Syria is shaking off a dark burden and tearing out a painful chapter of its past to embark on a path of development, reconstruction, and rebuilding. Great people of Syria, you have done it again. The sanctions have been lifted and the restrictions removed. I ask God Almighty to help us serve you.
Washington originally imposed the terror designation in 1979 under the rule of Hafez al-Assad. It remained in place until well after his son, Bashar, was ousted in December 2024 by a rebel coalition led by al-Sharaa. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the removal recognizes the new government's commitment to fully distance itself from international terrorism. It also follows intense bilateral negotiations, which reportedly included Damascus agreeing to drastically reduce its imports of Russian oil. The diplomatic shift is drawing regional support, with neighboring Turkey welcoming the move as a vital step towards Syria's recovery. The impact is already being felt in the corporate sector. With the terrorism label finally lifted, major global firms including Bank of America and MasterCard are now in talks to help reintegrate the country into the international financial system.
After the break, Ukraine's allies pledged to step up air defences after meeting for Independence Day celebrations in Kyiv. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Ukraine's allies are stepping up efforts to strengthen its air defences with the Coalition of the Willing meeting for Independence Day in Kyiv. Leaders are also considering how to increase pressure on Russia to end the conflict.
The Coalition of the Willing has focused on strengthening Ukraine's air defences, with Kyiv asking its partners for more systems to help counter Russian missile attacks. British Prime Minister Andy Burnham co-chaired the meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, as well as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Burnham used the meeting to announce that Britain and France would share Storm Shadow technology with Ukraine.
Volodymyr has now asked that we share our Storm Shadow technology so that Ukraine can build these capabilities themselves. I am pleased to confirm today that I have approved that request and that British and French industry, and we thank President Macron and his colleagues too, that we will now work with Ukraine to take this capability forward.
Zelensky said Ukraine urgently needs more air defences ahead of winter.
We need to make sure that the winter package of air defense will be in Ukraine, and we need winter package of Patriot missiles, and we need, and that we hope that we will have this package. We need at least 300 Patriot missiles for the winter and for the cold months.
Macron said France would speed up deliveries of interceptors to Ukraine, while also calling for stronger action against Russia's shadow fleet, including tougher sanctions and closer coordination. The meeting came as Burnham made his first overseas visit since becoming Prime Minister, joining European leaders in Kyiv for Ukraine's Independence Day. The Kremlin said sharing classified British technology would add fuel to the fire and further worsen relations. European leaders, however, used the meeting to reaffirm their commitment to strengthening Ukraine's defences as Kyiv continues to push for more support.
Independence Day has been celebrated in Kyiv just as Russia and Ukraine trade cross-border attacks, targeting key logistics and supply routes. Moscow says it has hit a cargo ship at a Ukrainian port, while Kyiv has launched a wave of drone strikes deep inside southern Russia, striking more warehouses of the online retailer Ozon.
Satellite images reveal the aftermath of Ukrainian drone strikes on major logistics hubs owned by the Russian e-commerce giant Ozon. The recent attacks sparked massive fires in Dagestan and Krasnodar, sending the retailer's shares tumbling. At the same time, Russia's defense ministry says its forces struck a cargo vessel in Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa, claiming the ship was delivering military supplies. The escalating cross-border exchanges formed a bitter backdrop to a tense session at the United Nations Security Council in New York. UN humanitarian officials warned diplomats that the relentless use of weaponized drones is devastating frontline communities.
In Kherson, I witnessed how drone warfare is dismantling civilian life. The area has become a dystopian landscape of kill zones and kamikaze drones, with roads and buildings draped in anti-drone netting.
The United States and its European allies used the meeting to press for an immediate ceasefire and a return to negotiations. But Russia's UN ambassador firmly rejected calls for a temporary halt to the fighting and accused Western nations of using civilian vessels to smuggle weapons into Ukraine.
Any attempts to impose on us a freeze on the conflict under the guise of a ceasefire are doomed to failure. As long as we are addressed in the language of ultimatums, terror and threats, there will be no basis for a meaningful political and diplomatic dialogue.
However, Ukraine's representative warned that civilians remain exposed to relentless Russian ballistic missile attacks. He demanded that allies immediately release defensive weapons currently sitting in storage.
I once again urge all our partners to take the only right decision today to provide Ukraine with all the available Patriot interceptor missiles currently held in stockpiles.
Kyiv is also proposing a global coalition to massively scale up interceptor production to shield its skies. Analysts say that, with Moscow rejecting a ceasefire on current terms and both sides expanding their strike zones, the prospects for a diplomatic breakthrough seem distant.
Romania says it scrambled 2 Spanish F-18 fighter jets after authorities said its radar systems detected an unidentified aerial target close to its border with Ukraine. It's after a target was detected around 4 kilometres east of the Ukrainian border city of Vilkov. No breaches of Romanian airspace were reported. Meanwhile, a border checkpoint between Ukraine and Moldova has been temporarily suspended after a Russian drone attack damaged infrastructure. Authorities advise travellers and hauliers to use alternative crossing points. And joining me now is Halina Yanchenko, a member of the Ukrainian Parliament, joining us from Kyiv, Ukraine. Halina, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Now, European leaders deliberately gathered in Kyiv on Ukraine's Independence Day and said Ukraine's security is integral to Euro-Atlantic security. Now, from Kyiv's perspective, what changed at this meeting beyond another demonstration of political solidarity?
There are several important outcomes, both symbolic but also some very practical ones. There were several important decisions. First, Great Britain will provide Ukraine with classified technology for the production of Scalp, also known as Storm Shadow missiles. There were steps to build an anti-ballistic coalition, which will use European radars with Ukrainian missiles. This is Freya project, which was announced. This is first important practical outcome. The second one, European leaders expressed their determination to increase military support for Ukraine, to strengthen air defense as priority and deepen cooperation with Ukraine defense industry, including the efforts within the anti-ballistic coalition. Well, currently, Russian ballistic is the biggest threat for Ukraine, but also given uncontrolled Russian aggression and the threat to European countries, our European partners are interested in cooperation and learning from Ukrainian experience, but also cooperating with Ukrainian technologies and know-how. Therefore, I assess the events and meetings that took place yesterday in Kyiv as both symbolic but also very practical to deepen defense cooperation.
Okay, so some of those practical outcomes that you just mentioned there, in light of those, Britain's share, as you said, Britain's sharing classified technology to help Ukraine produce long-range missiles. Domestically, France is accelerating air defence deliveries, and the EU has approved another 6.1 billion euros for defence. So is Europe now finally moving from supplying Ukraine with weapons towards helping Ukraine build a sustainable defence industrial capability of its own?
I believe that Ukrainian defense production has changed dramatically over the past 4.5 years. First, the capacity has boosted in 50 times. This is the first change. The second change, the technologies that were developed here in Ukraine. But currently, I would say that we still have some challenges. The first challenge I already mentioned, Russian ballistic. There is lack of the global lack of weapon that can actually tackle ballistic. Therefore, we should think out of box and actually target the launchers of ballistic. And this is something that I believe that we will work together with our British partners, but also some other European partners. This is something that Storm Shadow missiles can do. Another challenge that Ukraine faces, and we are seeking for some cooperation with European partners, is the lack of resources. Yes, Ukrainian private defense sector can produce quite a big amount of weapon and dual-use products to protect our countries, but the state budget is lacking resources. And therefore, currently, we moved from simply asking for military assistance to be purchased anywhere in the world to actually suggesting the partners who have allocated resources to support Ukraine to order and purchase this defense, weapon for defense here in Ukraine. It helps to also invest in Ukrainian military R&D, which is useful both for Ukraine but also for our Western partners. I would say these are the two main changes in Ukrainian defense sector, Ukrainian defense production over the years.
So which commitments matter most immediately, Halina?
The financial assistance, the funds which will be allocated to purchase Ukrainian weapon from Ukrainian producers to the front line. Currently, there was an announcement, a statement that Europe has started investing seriously in its own defense, and this is another basically source of funds that Ukrainian defense sector can rely on. Personally, I believe that horizontal ties, cooperation and co-production between Ukrainian and European companies is very important, but also very useful both for Ukrainian defense, but also for European defense. So this is the second source of funds, a source of financial support that will be useful for both parties.
And Helena, there's also the issue of security guarantees. Now, a group of allies have spent months planning for a multinational force to keep the peace after a ceasefire, but Moscow says any foreign troops in Ukraine would be targets. How can a security guarantee actually stop Russia if Russia rejects the plan entirely?
Well, we see that generally Russia is tending to reject anything and everything. For instance, just over the past year, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has suggested Russia to cease fire for at least 5 times. He suggested numerous locations to have negotiations, but Russia is simply ignoring this. So, in the opinion of the majority of Ukrainians and people who have expertise in diplomacy and politics, we believe that there is only one way to stop the war, is basically to force Russia. And of course, security guarantees, post-war security guarantees are very important. There are various options for the security guarantee. Of course, the best and the most trusted is NATO or something that looks like Article 5 of NATO agreement. But generally, it is still any type of options for security guarantee is still on the table of negotiations, also between Ukraine and our US.
Okay, and my last question, Helena, there's also a major development in the Black Sea. Ukraine proposed a deal to stop attacks on grain ships, but Zelensky says Russia's refusing unless Kyiv stops striking Russian oil refineries and energy sites. Does this prove that Ukraine's attacks on Russia's energy sector are hitting Moscow where it hurts now?
It's a good question. I believe that we simply don't have any other choices but to target Russian military objects, but also Russian oil refineries, given the fact that Russian oil and gas are the main source of income to keep, to basically fund this war of aggression against Ukraine. So if we cut Russian sources to fund the war, the chances that the war will be over are increasing. As I said, Russia is not in favor of any kind of diplomacy and negotiations. They are tricking and lying, or simply refusing. Therefore, we simply have one option: to force Russia, with force. To force Russia to stop the war. And this is something that we are doing, and we value and appreciate the assistance from our Western allies, but also other allies, to help us to bring peace back to European continent.
Helena, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. I appreciate your analysis. Kyrgyzstan is stepping up efforts to keep fuel prices under control as the country remains heavily dependent on imports. The government has allocated millions of dollars in subsidies while also looking for longer-term ways to strengthen energy security and prevent supply disruptions. Fariza Kalimirzina has more.
Kyrgyzstan has allocated around $11 million to keep fuel prices under control as the country faces continued pressure on its fuel market. The money is being used to compensate importers for the gap between the actual cost of fuel and the price consumers pay at the petrol stations. Depending on the type of fuel, that gap is between 23 and 46 cents per liter. The government says the subsidies will continue, and petrol stations across the country are expected to operate without restrictions. Kyrgyzstan remains heavily dependent on imported fuel. More than 90% of its petrol comes from Russia, while the country needs more than 1.5 million tons of petroleum products every year. That dependence became clear in late June when fuel traders reported shortages of EI-95 and EI-98 petrol. They linked the shortages to limited supplies from Russia and higher seasonal demand. But the authorities are also looking at longer-term measures. Kyrgyzstan plans to build new oil storage facilities to create strategic fuel reserves and protect the country against possible supply disruptions. At the same time, the government is looking to boost domestic fuel production and reduce its reliance on imports. A new mini refinery valued at $25 million is planned in southern Kyrgyzstan. It will have an annual capacity of 450,000 tons, with the first phase due to be completed in the autumn of 2026. Alongside these efforts, Kyrgyzstan is working with Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, China and Uzbekistan to diversify its fuel supplies and reduce the risk of future shortages. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Venezuela says it has struck a number of new gas and oil deals with international investors. The country is seeking to revive its economy and repair relations with Washington after the capture of its former leader, Nicolas Maduro, by US forces in January.
Venezuela says it has signed 50 strategic oil and gas agreements that authorities say will bring new investment to more than 76 production areas across the country. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez made the announcement on Tuesday.
ECLAC Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. On the other hand, projects Venezuela's growth at 6.5% for this year, the highest in the region. And we have now accumulated 21 consecutive quarters of expansion. These are important figures, but they are by no means the final objective, because there is still a long way to go to recover an economy severely impacted by sanctions.
Rodriguez didn't provide details of the new agreements or the value of the investment. The government says the deals are aimed at boosting investment and helping revive an economy hit hard by international sanctions. However, some analysts say that the country's oil revival is slow and that American firms haven't returned since Nicolas Maduro was extracted by the US in January this year. Earlier this month, Reuters reported that although oil production was rising, Venezuela's aging oil terminals were struggling to handle the increase. Tankers were reportedly waiting for up to 30 days to load, with power cuts, equipment problems, and oil quality issues adding to delays and limiting exports. The delays come as Venezuela works to revive oil exports under closer economic engagement with Washington, following years of sanctions and disruption to the sector.
Scores of people have been killed in a gang raid in Haiti. The United Nations has confirmed the mass fatalities that followed the attack on displaced people who were sheltering inside a church in the suburb of Kenskoff.
At least 47 people were killed and 22 more injured in an overnight gang raid on a neighborhood overlooking Haiti's capital of Port-au-Prince. That's according to the United Nations, which says estimates could still change. One of the Haitian rights group estimated that between 30 and 40 people were killed, while a local radio station reported that at least 42 people died. Local authorities and rights groups said the attack began late Sunday night. Kenskoff has faced repeated attacks by armed gangs in recent years, with residents reporting killings, kidnappings, arson and sexual violence. Residents accuse the government of failing to protect them. People in Kenskoff are suffering, and it is the government's fault. The government knows what the gangs do there. They know they make us suffer. Haiti's Prime Minister's office condemned what it called a heinous attack, saying security forces had been placed on high alert and reinforcements were being deployed. The attack highlights Haiti's ongoing security crisis, with armed groups controlling large parts of the country, particularly around Port-au-Prince.
After the break, Russia says Armenia is free to leave the CSTO, as Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says an application to join the EU will begin in the near future. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Armenian law enforcement officers have detained 6 people, including former President Robert Kocharyan, as part of a criminal investigation into the alleged illegal acquisition of state property. According to Armenia's Anti-Corruption Committee, Kocharyan is accused of using his position as president, together with close associates, to transfer state property into private ownership under various pretexts. Investigators allege that several valuable public and economically significant assets were acquired at prices significantly below market value. The committee says the properties were registered under affiliated companies in an attempt to conceal their true ownership and alleged criminal origin. Kocharyan's son and several other individuals were also detained in connection with the investigation. Armenia is set to begin the process of joining the European Union. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says a referendum on EU membership would be held once the formal submission to join the bloc has been made, with the process getting underway in the near future. Russia has recalled its ambassador from Yerevan and warned it could cancel an agreement on energy exports to Armenia in light of the developments. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Armenia could also leave the Collective Security Treaty Organization. He said Yerevan was free to leave if it no longer saw a need to remain in the group. Peskov spoke after Pashinyan said he would welcome Armenia being expelled from the CSTO.
I find it difficult to understand the phrase, "I would be glad if expelled." If Yerevan, from the perspective of its national interests, no longer requires membership in such an important organization for ensuring regional security, then it is free to make the appropriate decision and leave.
Joining me now is Vasif Husseinov, Head of Department at the Center for Analysis of International Relations, Baku, Azerbaijan. Mr. Husseinov, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Peskov's language is very straightforward. If Armenia no longer considers CSTO membership necessary, it's free to leave. Now, what does that suggest? Is Moscow accepting that Armenia's security relationship with Russia may be coming to an end, or is it? What's your assessment?
Yeah, Armenia's problems with CSTO and in relations with Russia started after Second Karabakh War, particularly after the clashes on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 2022. And since that time, Armenian government has expressed its willingness to leave the CSTO in the future and has already suspended its participation and stopped financing the organization. But apparently it requires some courage from the Armenian government to put a complete end to the process and to leave the CSTO. This is the reason why recently Prime Minister Pashinyan said that he would be glad if the CSTO members themselves expel Armenia from the organization. Apparently, Pashinyan is waiting for that moment for the CSTO itself to terminate Armenia's participation within the CSTO rather than Armenian government takes this step. And it is a demonstration of the recent crisis between the two countries, and it is likely to spill over other spheres of relations between Russia and Armenia in the near future, including in terms of Armenia's participation within the Eurasian Economic Union, which is an economic bloc of Russia, and Armenia is a member of it. So we are likely to see more tensions, more confrontation between the two countries in the upcoming months.
So if Pashinyan's government has concluded that the CSTO no longer provides Armenia with security, why hasn't Yerevan simply left?
Yeah, as I said, Armenia has already suspended its participation, is not participating in any major meetings of the institution, and has stopped financing the organization. But it is very bold, it may be a very bold step for the Armenian government to take more clear position and to say that they are leaving Russia's military bloc. As long as it's very important element here, Russia still has a military base in Armenia, and Russia is still controlling Armenia's borders with Iran and Turkey. So under these circumstances, it would be a premature decision from the Armenian side to just leave the CSTO while Russia is still present in Armenia's security sphere. That's going to take more time for Armenia to clear its position regarding CSTO and regarding Russia's presence in Armenia's security space. But what's happening at the moment it shows that this breakup between Armenia and CSTO and Armenia and Russia overall is going to last longer, and most likely it will lead to Armenia's withdrawal from the CSTO in the coming future.
And the Armenia now plans to formally apply for EU membership. Now, in your view, are we seeing a real permanent shift toward the West, or is this still just political talk?
Yeah, what happened over the past 32 years in relations between Armenia and the Western powers, particularly with the European Union and the United States, show that Armenia has opted for a strategic shift in its foreign policy outreach. Armenian government does not call it a pro-Western shift. For them, it is diversification of Armenia's foreign policy, and which has been until recently completely relied on alliance, on cooperation with Russia. After the war with Azerbaijan, Armenian government realized that Russia is no longer a reliable partner for Armenia. Russia did not provide security support Armenia needed, and this is the reason why they are trying to diversify their foreign policy to attract support from other powers, particularly from the United States and from the European Union. It is, I would say, it is not a complete anti-Russian and pro-Western shift. It is more a diversification in foreign policy, but of course that's something Russia does not welcome, because Armenia has been a staunch supporter of Russia's regional policies. Armenia has been Russia's ally. Armenia has been active member of CSTO and Eurasian Economic Union, and all of a sudden someone comes up in Armenia saying that no, we are now going to diversify our foreign policy. We are not going just to rely on Russia. And it is not welcomed by the Russian government. And all the recent tensions between Russia and Armenia are the demonstration of this discontent from the Russian side.
Okay.
But the breakup... okay.
I actually want to hone in on that for a moment. So staying on diversification, it doesn't have to mean being anti-Russian. Armenia wants stronger ties with the EU, the US, Turkey, and its neighbours just to secure its own independence. So why does Moscow see that as an outright threat?
Right now, Russia is in a very serious confrontation, rivalry with the United States, with the EU, and under these circumstances, one of Russia's major allies in the region is trying to distance itself from Russia and is opting for closer relations with Russia's enemies. They are not just adversaries or competitors anymore. They are considered by Moscow as enemies. So that's the reason why Armenia's diversification efforts and Pashinyan's efforts to get closer with the EU and the United States, raising alarming bells in Russia, particularly because Russia has a military base in Armenia. Russia is controlling Armenia's borders with Iran and Turkey, and Russia considers Armenia as a major stronghold in the South Caucasus to maintain its overall influence in the region, and also vis-a-vis Iran and Turkey, it has been a very useful instrument for Russia. And now, under very serious circumstances for the Russian government, the war in Ukraine, the confrontation with the United States, with EU, with the United Kingdom, Armenia's efforts to distance itself from Russia is, of course, creating for a security threat for the Russian government in their perception. That's Russia's view.
Okay. Vasif, I want to get one other question that's important here. Let's bring in Azerbaijan and Turkey. Now, historically, Armenia relied heavily on Russia for all the reasons you mentioned because of security fears surrounding its neighbours. Now, if Armenia successfully seals a peace deal with Baku and normalises ties with Ankara, does that completely erase the main reason Yerevan ever needed Moscow in the first place?
It is going to reduce the need of Armenia for closer relations with Russia. Of course, Armenian governments, particularly former governments, have used Russian support against Azerbaijan. Russia has been very much strong supporter of Armenia in its occupation of Azerbaijani territories. And Armenian government thought that Russia's presence in Armenia's security space is also a guarantee against Turkey. So now it is changing. Now, if Armenia eventually signs a peace treaty with Azerbaijan and opens its borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey, it is going to create new opportunities for the Armenian government in order to build alternative economic relations to reduce their dependence on Russian market. Armenia's dependence on the Russian market is very big. Around 35% of Armenia's economic trade turnover is with the Russian Federation. And it may change if Armenia gets new opportunities in Turkish market, in European market, via the Turkish territories. So it will, of course, change Armenia's foreign policy picture. It will boost Armenia's efforts for diversification in its economic relations with other partners and also its foreign policy outreach.
Mr. Vasif Husseinov, thank you so much for joining us on the program. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
The inaugural Silk Road Finance and Technology Forum is underway in Tashkent, with digital assets and stablecoins among the key issues on the agenda. As digital currencies gain ground globally, Central Asian countries are developing their own approaches to crypto. So could digital money become part of everyday life in the region? Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
The Silk Road Finance and Technology Forum brings together financial and technology leaders here in Tashkent to discuss the future of finance. Digital currencies are already a global phenomenon. The cryptocurrency market is worth around $2.3 trillion, with more than 560 million people worldwide estimated to own crypto. Central Asia is also moving beyond its earlier image as a crypto mining region. Kazakhstan has moved further towards a central bank digital currency, with the digital tenge being tested in areas including public procurement, smart contracts and retail payments. Uzbekistan allows the trading of digital assets through licensed providers and is developing framework for stable coins and asset tokenization. Kyrgyzstan, meanwhile, has introduced USD-KG, a state-supervised gold-backed stablecoin. The approaches differ, but the direction is becoming clearer. Governments across the region are trying to bring digital assets into regulated financial systems, rather than leave them entirely outside the system. But the region is taking different approaches to the same question: how much of our money should become digital?
There are different economies, different countries, but in some countries, it's still, need to have like 3-4 days to settle the remittance coming to that country, and you pay up to like 20% in various fees, various FX transactions during that course of those 4 days. While on the blockchain rails, the actual transmission of money happens in milliseconds, and the fees are really minimal. So this is actually what's changing the remittance industries right now, and it's really kind of great way to transfer money between the countries.
For Central Asia, digital currencies could mean more than a new payment method. They could speed up cross-border transactions, widen access to financial services, and strengthen the region's links to global markets. But making that potential part of everyday life will demand on regulation, security, and public trust. For now, Central Asia is not moving towards a single digital currency, but expanding several models, and the next few years may show which ones will gain real traction. Cyril Rajab, Natik Mamedov, and Halit Aliyev, A-News.
A-News' Sevil Rajapova also spoke to central bank fintech chief Ravshan Kadyrov about the fintech's prospects and challenges. He says the plan is to grow the sector in a sustainable way in Uzbekistan.
So the national fintech strategy encompasses the fintech ecosystem sustainable and long-term growth, because so far the fintech has grown in Uzbekistan in sort of a organic manner, if you will. So that's why now our aim is, without creating too much disruption, without creating too much over-regulation, to stimulate further that growth in order to make it more sustainable.
And that's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.